What happens when a billionaire businessman goes head-to-head with one of daytime TV's most outspoken hosts, and everything explodes into absolute chaos? It only took 33 seconds for Mark Cuban to be kicked off The View after the most shocking argument with Joy Behar that left the entire studio speechless. Before we dive into this absolutely insane confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next in this industry. Last night's episode of The View was supposed to be just another conversation about business and politics, but what actually went down will go down in talk show history as one of the most explosive moments ever caught on camera. Mark Cuban walked onto that stage with his usual confidence, shaking hands with the panel, smiling for the cameras, but within minutes, the atmosphere in that studio turned from friendly to absolutely hostile. The conversation started off simple enough. The panel was discussing the economy, inflation, and how everyday Americans were struggling to make ends meet. Cuban was explaining his views on capitalism and entrepreneurship, talking about how innovation and business creation were key to solving economic problems, when Joy Behar suddenly cut him off mid-sentence. "That's easy for you to say when you're worth billions," Joy said, her voice already carrying an edge that made everyone in the studio tense up. "You don't know what it's like for regular people who can't afford groceries, who can't pay their rent." Cuban paused, his jaw tightening slightly. You could see something shift in his expression, that flash of irritation crossing his face. "Actually, Joy, I grew up in a working-class family in Pittsburgh. My dad was an automobile upholsterer. We didn't have money. I slept on the floor of an apartment with 5 other guys when I first moved to Dallas. I know exactly what it's like." But Joy wasn't backing down. She leaned forward in her chair, pointing her finger at him, her voice getting sharper. "That was decades ago, Mark. Decades! You've been living in mansions and flying private jets for so long, you've completely lost touch with reality. You can't possibly understand what a single mother working 2 jobs is going through right now." Cuban's eyes narrowed. "And you can? You've been on television making millions for how long now, Joy? When's the last time you struggled to pay a bill?" The audience murmured. This was getting uncomfortable fast. Sarah Haynes shifted nervously in her seat, glancing at Whoopi for guidance. The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances. Whoopi tried to jump in to moderate, raising her hand. "Okay, let's just take it down a notch here." But Cuban raised his hand, cutting her off. "No, Whoopi, let me finish. I want to address this." He turned back to Joy, his voice getting louder, more forceful. "You're sitting here in your expensive studio, wearing designer clothes, making millions yourself, and you want to lecture me about being out of touch? Do you hear yourself right now?" The audience gasped. This wasn't the playful back-and-forth banter The View was known for. This was real tension, real anger bubbling to the surface. You could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating. Joy's face turned red, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Excuse me? I actually use my platform to fight for people who don't have a voice. Every single day I come here and I advocate for the working class, for people who are getting screwed over by the system. What do you do besides buy basketball teams and brag about your investments on Twitter? Are you serious right now?" Cuban shot back, his voice rising another level. He was standing up slightly from his seat now, leaning forward. "I've created thousands of jobs with real salaries and benefits. I've invested in hundreds of small businesses through Shark Tank, helping people achieve their dreams. I've donated millions to charity, to medical research, to education. What have you done besides complain on television 5 days a week?" The studio went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Even the cameras seemed to stop moving, the operators frozen behind their equipment. Sunny Hostin's mouth was hanging open, her eyes wide with shock. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair, her face pale. Alyssa Farah Griffin was frozen, her hand halfway to her water glass, not knowing whether to intervene or stay quiet. Joy stood up now too, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her voice was shaking with rage, rising to match his volume. How dare you? How dare you come on my show and disrespect me like this? You think your money gives you the right to talk down to people? You think because you have billions in the bank that makes you better than everyone else? Your show? Cuban laughed. But it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of cold, bitter laugh that comes right before everything falls apart completely. This isn't your show, Joy. Last time I checked, there were 5 hosts at this table. You're just one of them. And honestly, you're the one who started attacking me the second I sat down in this chair. Joy's hands were trembling now, balled into fists at her sides. I asked you a legitimate question about wealth inequality, and you turned it into a personal attack. You called me out of touch. Cuban fired back, his face flushed. You basically said everything I've accomplished means nothing because I have money now. That's not a question. That's an attack. Whoopi finally managed to get a word in, her voice firm and commanding. Okay, let's everybody just take a breath here and step back for a second. We're all getting way too heated. But Joy wasn't finished. She walked around the table, her heels clicking loudly on the floor, getting closer to Cuban's side of the set. Her finger was still pointed at him like a weapon. You billionaires are all the same, every single one of you. You think you can buy your way out of criticism, buy your way out of accountability. You think you can just throw some money at charity, and that makes up for the system that gave you all that wealth in the first place. Cuban stood up fully now, facing her directly. They were only a few feet apart, the tension between them almost visible. The producers were probably losing their minds in the control room, screaming into headsets. But the cameras kept rolling because this was television gold, even if it was a complete disaster. I'm not trying to buy anything, Joy. I came here in good faith to have an actual conversation about the economy, about business, about solutions. But all you want to do is grandstand and make yourself look good for your audience. You don't want dialogue, you want a punching bag. Get off my stage. Joy shouted, her voice cracking with anger, her face now completely red. If you can't handle a real conversation without throwing a tantrum, then get the hell off my stage right now. The audience was in complete shock. Some people were covering their mouths with their hands. Others were looking at each other in disbelief, whispering frantically. Children who had stayed home sick from school were probably watching this with their jaws on the floor. This kind of language, this kind of raw, unfiltered confrontation never happened on daytime television. This was cable news level drama happening at 11 in the morning. Cuban shook his head slowly, a bitter, cold smile spreading across his face. Unbelievable. This is what passes for journalism now? This is what passes for intelligent discourse? Screaming matches and personal attacks instead of actual debate? I said, get off. Joy repeated, even louder this time, her voice echoing through the studio. She turned to the producers off camera, her arm extended, pointing toward the wings. Get him off my set now! I want him gone! Whoopi stood up quickly, her chair rolling backward. She moved between them, her hands raised like a referee at a boxing match. Joy, please, let's just take a commercial break and calm down. No! Joy cut her off, her voice breaking with emotion now. Tears of rage were forming in her eyes, making them shine under the studio lights. I'm done with this! I'm done with arrogant billionaires coming on here thinking they can say whatever they want, thinking they can disrespect me, disrespect this show, disrespect everything we stand for. Sunny and Alyssa had both stood up now too, creating a barrier between Joy and Cuban. Sunny put her hand on Joy's shoulder, trying to guide her back to her seat. Joy, come on, let's sit down. But Joy shrugged her off. Don't tell me to sit down. This is my show. I've been here for 25 years. 25 years. And I'm not going to stand here and let some billionaire talk down to me. Like I'm nothing! Cuban pulled off his microphone, the sound making a loud, harsh, popping noise through the speakers that made everyone in the audience wince. You know what? I'm happy to leave. I'm actually relieved to leave because this is a joke anyway. He tossed the microphone onto his chair where it bounced and fell to the floor with a thud. You don't want a conversation, Joy. You just want someone to yell at so you can feel important, so you can feel relevant. That last word, hit Joy like a slap. Her eyes went wide, her mouth falling open. "What did you just say to me?" Cuban turned back, his own anger now matching hers completely. "You heard me! This whole thing is just theater for you! You're not interested in solving problems or having real discussions. You just want to perform for your audience, get your applause, feel like you're making a difference when all you're really doing is yelling at people who disagree with you." Joy took a step forward, but Whoopi grabbed her arm firmly. "That's it! Security! Get him out of here right now!" The other hosts were all talking at once, trying to de-escalate, but their voices just created more chaos. Sarah was saying, "Please, everyone calm down," while Sunny was saying, "Let's go to commercial." And Alyssa was frozen, her hand over her mouth in horror. Cuban started walking toward the stage exit, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, but he couldn't help himself. He turned back one more time, his face flushed with anger. You know what the sad part is? The really sad part? People actually watch this show thinking they're getting real news, real discussion, real insight. But all they're getting is angry people screaming at each other because they can't handle different opinions. This isn't journalism. It's not even entertainment. It's just sad. "Out!" Joy screamed one final time, her voice going hoarse from the strain. And that's when Cuban did something nobody expected. He stopped walking completely, turned around to face the entire panel, and looked directly into the main camera. His voice dropped lower, more controlled, but somehow more intense. "To everyone watching at home right now, this is what happens when you try to have an honest conversation with people who've convinced themselves they're always right. They shut you down. They kick you off. They call security. Because they can't handle the truth. They can't handle being challenged. They can't handle someone who doesn't just sit there and nod along with everything they say." Joy lunged forward, like she might actually physically remove him herself, her arms outstretched, but Whoopi and Sunny grabbed her arms, holding her back with all their strength. "You arrogant son of a bitch," Joy yelled, struggling against their grip. "Get out of my studio before I throw you out myself. I swear to God, Mark, get out!" The audience was completely silent now, frozen in their seats. Some people had their phones out, recording every second of this disaster. This was going to be everywhere within minutes. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. This was the kind of viral moment that defined careers, for better or worse. Security finally appeared from the wings. Two large men in dark suits with earpieces, their faces professional and neutral. They approached Cuban with their hands slightly raised, ready to intervene if necessary. But he put his hands up in mock surrender, his face twisted into a sardonic smile. "I'm leaving. Don't worry. I wouldn't want to spend another second in this circus anyway." He looked at Joy one more time, his voice dripping with contempt. "Good luck with your echo chamber, Joy. I hope it keeps you warm at night knowing you never have to hear an opinion that challenges you ever again." The camera caught Joy trying to break free from Whoopi and Sunny's grip, her face contorted with rage, tears streaming down her cheeks now. Her voice was hoarse and breaking from screaming. "Don't you ever come back here, you hear me? Never. You're banned. Banned from this show. Trust me," Cuban said, already halfway to the exit. "I wouldn't come back if you paid me." Cuban disappeared into the wings, the stage door slamming behind him with a loud bang that echoed through the studio. The last thing viewers saw before they cut to commercial was Joy collapsing back into her chair, her co-hosts surrounding her in a protective circle, trying to calm her down while she sobbed with frustration and rage. The audience sat in stunned, uncomfortable silence, not knowing whether to applaud, boo, or just sit there processing what they'd just witnessed. The whole confrontation had escalated so fast that nobody could quite process what they'd just witnessed. One minute they were having what seemed like a normal political discussion about the economy and wealth distribution, and the next minute security was being called and the guest was being physically removed from the set. The temperature in that studio had gone from warm and friendly to absolutely toxic in a matter of minutes. But the worst part wasn't even the screaming or the personal attacks or the raw anger on display. It was how genuine the hatred felt in that moment. This wasn't scripted drama cooked up by producers to boost ratings. This wasn't manufactured conflict designed to get people talking. You could see in both their faces, in their body language, in the way they moved toward each other like fighters in a ring, that they genuinely couldn't stand each other in that moment. Something about their conversation had touched on something deeper, something more personal than just a disagreement about politics, or money, or class warfare. As Cuban walked down the corridor backstage, still wearing his microphone pack because he'd thrown the actual mic on the floor, you could hear him muttering to himself, his voice picked up by the equipment still attached to his belt. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. 25 years on television, and she still can't handle a basic disagreement. A producer tried to approach him to retrieve the equipment, jogging to keep up with his angry stride, but he waved them off dismissively. I'll send it back to you. Just stay away from me right now. Meanwhile, back on the set, Joy was still visibly shaking, her whole body trembling with the aftermath of that much adrenaline and rage. Her co-hosts had formed a protective circle around her, blocking her from the cameras, offering water, tissues, trying to get her to take deep breaths and calm down before they had to go back on air. But she kept shaking her head violently, tears of rage still streaming down her face, smearing her carefully applied makeup. He comes on here with his attitude, his arrogance, thinking his money makes him better than everyone else, thinking he can just waltz in here and disrespect me on my own show. Whoopi put a firm hand on her shoulder, her voice low and serious. Joy, honey, we need to go to commercial. We need to compose ourselves and figure out how to handle this when we come back. But Joy pulled away from her touch, standing up and pacing behind the table. No, people need to see this. They need to see what these billionaires are really like when you challenge them, when you don't just kiss their asses and thank them for gracing us with their presence. This is important. Alyssa tried a softer approach, her voice gentle and soothing. Joy, honey, you're absolutely right about everything, but we need to take a break and figure out how to handle this professionally. For the show, for all of us. Joy finally nodded, wiping her eyes roughly with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. The director called for a commercial break, his voice cutting through the chaos, and the lights dimmed slightly on the set. Makeup artists rushed in immediately, trying to fix Joy's face, repair the damage from the tears and the anger. In the parking lot behind the studio, Mark Cuban climbed into his waiting car, slamming the door harder than necessary. The sound echoed in the enclosed space. His driver, who had been waiting patiently, glanced at him in the rearview mirror with concerned eyes. Everything okay, Mr. Cuban? That seemed like it ended earlier than expected. Cuban loosened his tie roughly, pulling it away from his neck like it was choking him. He stared out the window at the building he'd just been kicked out of, his jaw still clenched tight. Just drive. Get me out of here. Where to, sir? I don't care. Just away from here. Drive. As the car pulled away from the ABC studios, Cuban pulled out his phone. It was already blowing up with notifications. Messages, calls, texts, emails, all flooding in at once. His publicist, his business partners, his friends who had been watching live, reporters already asking for comments. The little red notification bubbles were multiplying by the second, but he ignored all of them, just staring at the building, getting smaller and smaller in the distance through the rear window. Inside the studio, the commercial break was almost over. The makeup artist rushed over to Joy, working frantically to fix her appearance before they went back live. Her mascara had run in dark streaks down her face from the tears of frustration. Foundation had to be reapplied. Her hair needed smoothing. The other hosts were huddled together at the far end of the table, whispering urgently about how to address what had just happened when they came back on air. This was unprecedented territory for all of them. 30 seconds, the stage manager called out, his voice cutting through the hushed conversations. Joy straightened up in her chair, taking a long drink of water. Her hands were still trembling slightly as she set the glass down, but her face was hardening back into that familiar defiant expression her viewers knew so well. The vulnerability from moments ago was being carefully packed away, replaced by armor. 15 seconds. The other hosts took their seats quickly, exchanging worried glances. None of them had ever seen Joy lose control like that in all their years working together. Sure, she was passionate, she was outspoken, she got fired up about issues. That was her brand. That's what viewers loved about her. But this was different. This had crossed a line from passionate debate into something that felt almost dangerous, like watching a car crash in slow motion. 5, 4, 3, 2. The lights came back up to full brightness, and Whoopi was the first to speak, her voice carefully measured and professional. We're back, and obviously we need to address what just happened before the break. She paused, choosing her words very carefully, knowing that every syllable would be analyzed and replayed endlessly. Emotions ran very high during our conversation with Mark Cuban, and unfortunately, the discussion became heated to the point where we had to ask him to leave the show. Joy jumped in immediately, her voice still carrying that sharp edge of anger, though she was clearly trying to control it better now. Let me be very clear about something, and I want everyone watching to understand this. I will not tolerate being disrespected on this stage. I will not tolerate billionaires coming here and looking down on working people, dismissing the struggles of everyday Americans, acting like their wealth gives them some kind of moral superiority. And when someone crosses that line, when someone disrespects not just me but everyone who watches this show, they need to go. Period. End of story. The audience applauded loudly, some of them even standing up, but there were others who sat silently, looking uncomfortable with the whole situation, shifting in their seats and glancing at each other uncertainly. Sonny tried to add some balance. I think what we saw today was a reminder that these conversations about wealth, about privilege, about who gets to speak for whom, these are incredibly charged topics right now in our country. But Joy wasn't interested in balance. This wasn't about having a charged conversation, Sonny. This was about a man who came here thinking he could bulldoze over me, over us, because he has money. And I don't care how many billions you have, that's not happening on my watch. Sarah Haynes, always the diplomatic one, chimed in quietly. I think maybe we all could have handled certain moments differently. No, Joy interrupted sharply. I handled it exactly how it needed to be handled. You give people like that an inch, and they take a mile. They think they own the world because they own companies. Well, this is my house, and in my house, you show respect or you leave. The commercial break came and went, but the tension on the set never fully dissipated. Joy remained defensive and aggressive every time Cuban's name came up. The other hosts tried to move on to other topics, but the energy in the room had completely changed. Backstage, producers were in full crisis mode, phones pressed to their ears. Network executives wanted immediate answers. Legal was getting involved to make sure nothing said opened them up to lawsuits. The social media team watched as clips went viral across every platform. The confrontation was being replayed millions of times, dissected frame by frame, memed into oblivion. But out there on that stage, as the show limped toward its conclusion, you could still see Joy's hands shaking slightly every time she picked up her note cards. You could still see that fire in her eyes that hadn't dimmed even a little bit. And somewhere across town, Mark Cuban was feeling that same fire, that same stubborn refusal to back down or admit any fault. Neither of them won that confrontation, but both of them lost something in it. Cuban lost his composure and his carefully maintained image as the cool, level-headed businessman. Joy lost control of her show and potentially her credibility as someone who could handle disagreement without exploding into rage. As the cameras finally stopped rolling and the studio lights dimmed, Joy remained in her seat while the others filed out. She sat there alone, staring at the empty chair where Cuban had been sitting just an hour before, replaying every word, every insult, every moment where things had spiraled out of control. A production assistant approached carefully. Miss Behar, we're wrapping for the day. Joy nodded slowly, but didn't move. Did we get him out? Did security actually remove him? He left on his own, ma'am, before security could reach him. Joy let out a bitter laugh. Of course he did. Had to have the last word. Had to make his dramatic exit. She stood up finally, gathering her papers with sharp, angry movements. Typical billionaire bullshit. As she walked off the stage, past the crew members who carefully avoided making eye contact, past the producers, still frantically making phone calls, Joy Behar looked like someone who had just been through a war. Her shoulders were tight, her jaw was clenched, and that fire in her eyes showed no signs of burning out. And somewhere in Los Angeles traffic, Mark Cuban sat in the back of his car, his own jaw clenched, his own mind replaying every second of what had just happened, feeling that same burning sense of injustice and anger. His phone continued to buzz with calls and messages, but he just stared at it, not ready to deal with any of it yet. Two strong personalities had collided with the force of a freight train, and the wreckage was now scattered across daytime television for everyone to see, analyze, and judge. The clips would be played endlessly. Everyone would have an opinion about who was right and who was wrong. The show was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. As Cuban's car turned onto the highway and Joy's footsteps echoed through the empty studio hallway, both of them carried that confrontation with them like a weight they couldn't shake. Because some arguments, some moments of pure, unfiltered conflict, they don't just end when the cameras stop rolling. They stay with you, replaying in your mind at 3 a.m, making you question every word you said, every reaction you had, every moment where you could have taken a breath and chosen a different path. But neither Mark Cuban nor Joy Behar were the types to second-guess themselves, to admit fault, to wish they'd handled things differently. So as the sun set over Los Angeles and New York, as social media continued to explode with takes and opinions and outrage from both sides, both Cuban and Joy went to sleep that night, probably thinking the exact same thing, that they were right, that the other person was completely out of line, and that they'd do it all over again exactly the same way if given the chance. Because that's what happens when two people who are absolutely convinced of their own righteousness collide head-on. Nobody wins, nobody learns anything, and the only thing left behind is the smoking crater of a confrontation that nobody will forget anytime soon. Mark Cuban walked off that stage, carrying his wounded pride and his burning sense of being wronged. And in that moment, as the studio doors closed behind him and the outside world came rushing back in, the only thing he knew for certain was that he would never, ever set foot on The View again.